Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Paul Stevens, editor of Short-Term Rentals, and welcome to this Rockstars 5.0 webinar on the new categories of flexible living, sponsored by Flywire and NoiseAware. This is me, Paul Stevens, the host for today's session. And we're now going to check out this short video from one of our Rockstars series sponsors, NoiseAware, a privacy-safe smart noise monitoring solution for short-term rental property managers and owners. Check this out.
Property damages, angry neighbors, and sound ordinance violations have in common, they all begin with a noisy guest at your property. That could have been resolved with NoiseAware. Through quick installation and 24-hour monitoring, NoiseAware is an essential tool that monitors noise levels on your property to help protect your profits and peace of mind. NoiseAware. Rest easy.
So in terms of webinar guidelines for today, please keep your sound on mute and your camera off if you're not speaking. I'm being ably assisted by my colleagues Danny and Floor today. All of the details you can find in the chat, so please do post any questions you have there throughout the session, and a recording will also be sent round to everyone after today's webinar. And one more short video from our second Rockstars series sponsor, and that is global payments enablement and software company Flywire.
Flywire helps travel businesses reduce costs and improve guest experience when collecting payments. Without Flywire, travel payments can be costly and inefficient, requiring the business to work with multiple vendors like payment processors, merchant banks, and more. The process results in difficult manual reconciliation, high fees on both sides of the transaction, and no dedicated support for payers or merchants. We solve these pain points through our Flywire Advantage, the combination of our next-gen payment platform, our proprietary global payment network, and our travel-specific software, backed by our deep industry expertise, to improve both sides of the payment equation. Guests pay in their local currency and with their preferred payment method, whether it be credit card, local bank transfer, mobile wallets, or other local payment methods. Flywire leverages our significant scale to ensure travel businesses and guests alike enjoy low fees and competitive exchange rates. Businesses receive the exact amount that they bill in the currency of their choice for both domestic and international payments, all reconciled to the penny. If there are any questions along the way, Flywire's around-the-clock multilingual support and dedicated account managers are there to help. To learn more, visit travel.flywire.com and request a demo today.
So thank you to NoiseAware and Flywire for sponsoring this webinar series. And let me start by introducing our Rockstars lineup for today. We're going to start with Brian, who I know is tuning in over the phone today. So Brian, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, Paul.
Yeah, please introduce yourself, Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Carrico, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Guild. I originally started my career as a consultant where I traveled a lot before moving into the hospitality business by co-founding a hotel development company alongside my wife. That ultimately was the Guild where really we honed in this mission to craft experiences that renters and owners love and really foster a connected community. So hopefully to be here, and thanks.
Thank you very much, Brian, and to the Guild for taking part in today's session. Next up, we have Emmanuel from Jetstream. Take it away, Emmanuel.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for the opportunity to be on this really interesting panel. My name is Emmanuel Lavoie. I am the CEO of Jetstream Hospitality Solutions, and we are a company headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, but we have offices around the world and teams around the world. So we come to this topic of flex living or this market or this emerging segment really from deep hospitality background. For about a decade, we've been helping hospitality companies of all sizes, anything from tiny little property managers with 1 or 2 homes to large condo hotel or even the largest hotel companies in the world. We help them reach new short-term rental channels, which historically they haven't been on. So that's been our expertise. And increasingly, we've had asset owners seeing this expertise and essentially asking us to just outsource to us, essentially a big part of their operations. And so that's kind of how we're getting into the now working directly with the real estate asset owners, and increasingly they're talking about flex. And so this emerging topic is happening around us, and that's how we're here at this topic on this panel today.
Excellent. Delighted to have you on board today, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for that introduction. Next up, we have Fred from Lavanda.
Hi there, I'm Fred. I'm the CEO of Lavanda. I'm super excited about this because this is kind of our raison d'etre. So we are a property management system for what we call flexible rentals. So short, medium and long-term rentals weaved together. And we predominantly focus for institutional real estate are our main customers. So large multifamily or student operators, people like Greystar, Blackstone, partners like that, but also service apartment businesses. And we generally speaking are across the US, Europe, Middle East and Australia. So yeah, really excited to see you all.
Excellent, thank you, Fred. And last but by no means least, we have Jason from the newly renamed Placemaker.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. As Paul mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Placemaker, formerly Y Hotel. And it's exciting to be around a bunch of folks that are all tackling a similar problem, but from different angles. We are also in the business of, we call it hospitality living, but that blending between multifamily and hospitality. And we've built a platform that allows folks to operate buildings across that spectrum of furnished to unfurnished, short and long stay. We have two business lines. One's called a pop-up hotel. And that's when someone like Avalon Bay or Equity Residential builds a brand new apartment building in the United States. We're US based. It's all empty. So we take 100 of the units, furnish it and run a hotel out of their empty units just while they're filling up with residents. And then our second business line, which is the majority of our inventory today, over 80%, is when we take that same building, that same call it 300 unit apartment building. And on a forever basis, we run it as that mix of furnished and unfurnished short and long stay, optimizing the value for the real estate owners and the experience for consumers. We are both a buyer of real estate as well as a manager and tech platform operator. We bought about $250 million of real estate last year, and we're on pace to buy another $1 billion or so here over the next 18 to 24 months. And then in terms of management, I think we have about $400 million on the permanent side of the platform, maybe another $200 to $300 million on the temporary side. My background is also from the institutional world. I was an executive at Vornado Realty and ran innovation over there a number of years ago. And that's pretty much the makeup of our leadership team. We're a combination of real estate folks and high growth venture folks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jason, and welcome to all of our panelists for today. So to add a little bit of context to today's discussion, we're going to be looking at how Lavanda is partnering with the likes of Alda and also helping to launch JLL short stays for their respective rental platforms. We're going to be looking at how the Guild is expanding its urban portfolio, including acquiring Krea Management in the last couple of months. Two of the companies represented on today's session have recently secured funding as well. So we have Fred from Lavanda, who raised $7.25 million to accelerate its global growth, and Placemaker, recently rebranded from Y Hotel, raising $90 million. And finally, we look at flexible living trends with Jetstream. It's partnerships with companies you can see there on your screen. And also in our 2022 predictions, we analysed what will happen next for digital nomads, alternative accommodations and flexible leasing options. So do check that out in the link provided in the chat. So let's kick off today's conversation, and I'm going to start with Fred actually. Fred, I think you're doing some really interesting things at the moment with Lavanda. We already mentioned your partnership with Alda and launching JLL short stays, which I know also caters to both business and leisure travelers, trying to provide more of a, what you would say maybe a more trusted professional alternative to the likes of Booking.com, Airbnb, etc. So I'm wondering, from your own experience, what does flexible living entail for you?
Yeah, sure. So for us, flexible rentals or flexible living really is about not the industry kind of defining the terms and conditionality around accommodation, which I think it has done for too long. So, hey, 12 months, here you go. This is how it works on the lease. It's all very kind of maybe convenient for that side, the supply side. But from the demand side, what we're seeing is a huge change in how people interact with accommodation. They might want to stay for 1 month, 2 months, 1 day. Some people might want to come from abroad via one channel. Maybe it's Airbnb for a couple of months. Then they actually might want to link across into the main kind of platform that the building is using, because they might want to stay there permanently. They might then want to sublet. They might then want to go live in another one of the branded community, particularly the bigger parties. So all of that flexibility on the front end needs a really flexible consumer journey that's digital first, that can figure out different regulations in different markets. And especially as our customers, at least multifamily student, are going global, there are different regs in different parts of the world that you need to figure out. So that effectively, that whole flexibility of tenure, short, medium, and long, and then having a material amount of on-demand services surrounding that, so you can effectively build your stay. So whether it's kind of like, yeah, I'd like it to be furnished, I'd like it to be unfurnished, I'd like it to be monthly cleans, I'd like to maybe have weekly cleans, for a period, I'd like this. Having the ability to bolt on all those services and pick your desired consumer experience, that's where we believe a large segment of real estate is moving towards. And so our mission is to power that, to make that as easy and as feasible, because I think a lot of the real estate world wants to do that. They just don't have the tools available for them. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it's about that freedom of experience and possibility for a prospective guest or resident. So that's for us what it is.
We alluded to your funding round as well. So how would you say you're powering this type of living concept that we mentioned?
Yeah, so we're lucky enough to have a kind of a mix of different partners who backed us. Recently, we were backed by Starwood Capital in the US, so the real estate company there, and a European VC called Finch Capital, who've also partnered with other PropTech companies like Goodlord and Trussell over time. And we've gone for a kind of a range. We went for a kind of a range of VC and corporate to kind of give us a balance between kind of prospective customers and partners, but also having the kind of growth capital and software experience from partners like Finch. So they've been fantastic backers and super supportive of us, as well as historic partners like Henley. And so that mix of kind of specialized industry knowledge as well as growth support is driving us globally. And for us, it's really we mentioned this before the panel started, but the TAM and the potential size of this market, we think is absolutely huge for everyone on this call, frankly. We can grow 10x and still be good about that. So it's really about finding partners who can help you grow, not necessarily, the dollars, but how do you actually achieve that growth in a good way for you and your customers?
Yeah, thank you very much, Fred. And talking of growth, we've seen some significant growth recently at the Guild. Brian, adding more than 500 units to your urban portfolio, and you've talked about creating this innovative turnkey type platform that is capable of catering to all different types of length of stay and stay type. So how do you see the flexible living landscape at the moment? How do you see it now and maybe changing moving forward?
Yeah, Paul, and with the Korea acquisition, we actually added over 5,000 units between the units that are currently in operation as well as the pipeline. And I think it's indicative of how the landscape is evolving. We're working with partners like Jason and others have mentioned, oftentimes institutional partners that see an opportunity to cater to renters in a different way. And so what I see flexible living as is really the opportunity to let the renter choose their experience and not be hemmed in to the traditional world of renting where you could have any lease you wanted as long as it was 12 months and it was unfurnished. With the Guild, we took the lessons that we learned by starting out really as a short-term rental company of solving technological problems, solving experience problems, and then applying that to all renters of all lengths and types. And so when you walk into a Guild building now, you can choose to live there for years, or you can choose to be there for months, or you can choose to be there for days. And we have options for all of that. And I think what it just reflects is more power kind of going into the renter's hands. Like, we really view ourselves as a renter-centric platform where we're constantly looking at data. We're looking for ways that we can drive more value to them. As a startup, we're generally in the business of creating value. So we're constantly looking to see what types of services can they expect, what kind of services are they looking for, what really drives a better experience. And then we use that as kind of the guiding light. And so also we do this as a management platform. So we'll sign up a new building with the owner, and we don't have a set allocation. We don't go in with a set strategy for the owner. We're really able to take the learnings of operating as a short-term rental operator, and then use that to inform the owner. You know, we've been around for a while now, over 6 years, and so we have a lot of data where we can put that in front of the owner to help them make good decisions as well. To say, okay, well, if you want to offer flexible living, what can you expect in terms of the adoption rate of that? What can you expect in terms of the financial returns from that? And I think that's really, again, the key to future of flexible living is making sure that we're honing in on services that drive real value to the renters, and that we're also doing it in a way that creates more financial value for owners, so everybody across the chain is happy that they're able to do it and ultimately walks away, you know, more satisfied.
Thank you, Brian. Apologies if I missed a zero off that addition to your urban portfolio, but we'll move on quickly from that anyway. Thank you, Brian. And Emmanuel, what you're doing at Jetstream is probably quite different as well to what we're seeing from the rest of the panel. So I'm interested to hear what you think when you hear these terms: flexible living, flexible rentals. What does it mean to you specifically at Jetstream, and conversely with developers?
Yeah, thanks. For me personally, I mean, we all know why, a big part of why this is happening: COVID, remote work, digital nomad, probably the biggest seismic shift in how humans are working, or where they have to work from, or at least hundreds of millions of us have to work from ever in the history of humanity. So for me as a traveler, or as a digital nomad, I mean, I'm not nomadic, but I certainly work from home, so I can work wherever I want. To me, it's the ability to go to Mexico and rent some place for 2 months, and then go somewhere else in Europe, as I just did for a month, because we have an office over there, and just move. I think there's just a lot more people being able to move right now and work from where they are. So on the consumer side, that's that side. On the developer side, or I guess, yeah, the asset side, I was recently at the American Lodging Investment Summit in LA, and this was landing pretty flat. I mean, for the most part, the conversations were with traditional developers, traditional hotel management co's. There was no light bulb really going on that. But I did meet one developer based in Florida who got it. And he saw our company, or our company type, as a tool for him to do this. And he was saying, usually when I do a real estate development, I hire these consultants and they do all kinds of predictions on revenue and occupancy and so on. And then I get financing from the bank, and then I go ahead and build a building. He says, I want to build an apartment building where I'm going to let the market, so the renters, dictate what my allocation should be. So it's really bringing this on the asset side, this nimbleness of how you're running the asset, which therefore means the traditional management model doesn't really work well in that. The technology that's used by those management co's and the fixed rigid model, employment model. So you need something much more flexible, much more variable cost. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing in the industry and talking to some of our partners.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And following on from that, Jason, you know, what you're doing at Placemaker as well, I wonder how you understand this term flexible living. It is quite a broad term, and it perhaps gets bandied about without people necessarily knowing exactly what they're referring to. But how do you understand this term specifically, and how do you try and incorporate it within your own business model?
Yeah, so I'm, aligned with everyone here, especially what Fred said earlier about the size of the market. We're, in my view, we're at a point in time where there's going to be a seismic shift in the kind of real estate that gets built and how it gets operated. Much like you saw with the institutionalization of hotels or private student housing or data logistics centers or regional shopping malls, like you're about to see an asset class, an institutional asset class be born. But the difference is it's an asset class that blends two of the biggest uses in human history. And so it's going to be gigantic. All of us here can be successful, and then the other 1,000 people that are going to come after us, try to beat us, whatever. I think my background is in real estate. And so I generally look at all of this from a real estate economic standpoint. And basically what we're doing, even though we're not saying it, is we're financially engineering a new asset class that has a different risk return profile that is better than a hotel or an apartment building. And that means that the market clearing price of land is going to reflect that. That means the pricing of existing buildings is going to reflect that. And that means that there's a tremendous number of tools that are needed to actually execute that in the real physical world. And that's what we're all working on. I don't know what the eventual name is going to be, like private student housing, like who came up with that, or regional shopping malls, whatever. There'll be a name that sticks. We call it hospitality living, but it doesn't really matter what it's called in the end. What'll matter is you'll see the debt markets aligned behind it. And, we've raised 150 million in debt over the last, 12 months to buy buildings. Like you'll see the equity markets aligned behind it. And you're seeing this one really odd thing happen in real estate investing on the investing side. And that is that you're getting this bifurcation of large investors from folks that are fund-based, that are like, hey, I need to chase a 15% return. Probably the folks Emmanuel talked to, 20% return when he was at Alice. And then the B REITs of the world, the B REITs, the Starwood REITs, the Brookfield's doing it, which is like, hey, real estate is really just another version of a bond. It's a bond that has a better, better yield profile than a treasury. And so you're actually seeing different pools of capital. And when you optimize an asset by blending this, hospitality, home, and everything in the middle, it's a yield play. When you drive more income out of the asset. And so you're going to see just a bunch of really exciting things happen as this asset class becomes institutionalized. When we think about what we're building, I think one thing that's lost on a lot of people that aren't in it is messy today. It is messy because it is complicated. I was interviewing someone earlier this morning, and she was like, there's a lot of friction in this. There's like furnished and unfurnished and short and long. Like, there's a lot of friction. And what I said to her was, it's not friction, it's complexity. It's kind of like in the world of building airplanes. It used to be like humans had to be able to control the airplane, because if not, it would crash. And then this thing called fly-by-wire existed, where computers were able to optimize the airplane in the sky to make it more dynamic and make it fly better. And everything's fly-by-wire now. And I think that's what you're going to see all of us here solve, and others, is that there's going to be a tech-enabled way to optimize these assets for consumers and for investors. And that's what the fund's going to be, and then the assets that's going to institutionalize. And we're going to look back at this moment and think it's silly that we're like, oh, is this going to become a thing? Like, this is becoming a thing.
Yeah, and you've already brought up that term, hospitality living. I think that's probably going to be a thread that we see running throughout this whole conversation. So I'm going to turn thank you very much for that first, Jason. I'm going to turn the conversation back to Brian as well, because we're seeing, when we're introducing this webinar as well, we're talking about how the way we work, the way we live, the way we travel is becoming a lot more intertwined nowadays. And that's something I hear a lot from the calls that I'm having every week. So how exactly is the Guild blending home and hospitality, home comforts and experiences at the same time?
Well, we really started out as a hospitality company, and if you look at our team, our team is made up of a blend of traditional multifamily professionals, hospitality professionals, sort of all working together as one with that view, which is, like I said, it's a renter-centric or it's a guest-centric point of view to start with. When you work in a hotel or you grow up working in hotels, we taught that from very early on, that you find ways to solve problems and to make sure that the guest is happy. And ultimately, hospitality living is how that for being as walking into a boutique hotel or a great restaurant and getting that experience, but not just bifurcating it to saying like you can only get that if you're staying here for a couple of nights. In our case, we look for those opportunities throughout the entire experience, and then also really harnessing the value or the promise of a brand. And that's not really happening right now in traditional multifamily. If I live in a traditional multifamily building owned by most companies, and I move to another city, they're not actively trying to give me incentives to stay with that brand again. They're not actively looking for ways to reward loyalty. And so at the Guild, the way that we've taken that approach is really that sort of hotel idea of loyalty and experience, and applying it no matter how long you happen to be staying with us. And so if you live in a Guild building in Austin, and then you want to travel to Miami or Denver or Dallas or other places, we give you discounts, we give you promos, we reward your loyalty. If you have friends that are coming into town, we do the same. They can stay with you instead of having to sleep on your couch. They can stay in the building and get that experience. And so I just think there's an enormous opportunity to create brands within the space. And I think that the renters deserve it too. I mean, this is most people's single largest expense. And right now it's being treated like a commodity. And, you know, the review scores for traditional property managers tend to hover in the same range as, you know, airlines and cable companies. And so I think whether it's us or Jason or others, everybody's looking at it from the totality of opportunity to really turn that on its head.
And talking of those expanded services in the multifamily space, is the main reason for expanding those services to drive brand loyalty, or are there other reasons in play?
The main reason is to make the person on the other end happy and make sure that they have a great experience. And if you do that, the brand loyalty takes care of itself.
Thank you very much for that, Brian. And back to Fred as well, because again, on this webinar, we've seen 4 very different business models, but all sort of operating in these lines between the short-term rental and flexible rental space. So why do you think so many global real estate companies are bringing in these flexible models, whether it's pilots or being rolled out now?
Yeah, so from our perspective, what we're seeing is really interesting. So obviously, we've just had the pandemic and arguably it's still in it in parts of the world. But I think you know, when you think through the business models that a lot of real estate companies are in, and Jason was kind of alluding to this, in many ways, they're basically taking debt, turning it into buildings, and then making a kind of an arbitrage trade around the yield play there. And that business model for many, many years has been build it and they will come. There's been a little bit of that going on. It's kind of like you find your location, you do your demographics, you do your analysis, you build it. And then frankly, the experience and the tech down the road is not considered very high on that list. But the pandemic really changed things. And a lot of business models were broken, or at least, if not temporarily, kind of structurally broken. We've seen shifts from central cities of big urban capitals out to suburbia. We've had shifts back and forth. We've had student massively impacted in terms of travel. Countries dependent on Chinese foreign students, for example, massively impacted. Australia still hugely recovering. And that's allowed a kind of 2-3 year window where people have had to get really creative. During that window, you've also seen in real estate companies kind of what we call rising stars, like people kind of, you know, somewhere in their 30s to 40s, kind of redefining themselves a little bit. They've been born with a lot of tech, they've traveled on Airbnb, and they're kind of looking at their own businesses and saying, God, why are we not better at this? Why are we not embracing some of that complexity we talked about earlier? And so throughout all of that, I think people are realizing that when you incorporate short and medium-term rentals into your building, you're not necessarily making things more complicated. You're actually making your asset much more defensive. If you can shift between short, medium, and long, dependent on market conditions, dependent on events, if there's suddenly like the Olympics in your country, that can make a huge impact for like 9-12 months. If demographic shift on student versus multifamily, you know, all of that you can embrace. That actually should make your asset more valuable. And without getting too financial, there are things called cap rates, which are basically how these assets are valued. In many ways, I do believe very, very strongly, I think Jason, you talked about this, that this asset class will form itself out, detach, and effectively represent lower cap rates, which is higher valuation. If even a small part of that emerges, of that thesis, we're talking about a huge asset class. And there's a lot of very, very smart people working at the Blackstones, Greystars, you know, Brookfields of the world, and they're exposed to this. They see this, and they formed little baby trials during the pandemic in kind of 19, 20, 21. And now they're realizing that, you know, one of the advantages they can bring to it is scale. So if they've got 1, 2, 3 buildings they tried during that period, they're now going for sort of 20, 30 buildings globally. And we're seeing that formation of these little trials now coming to rollouts, to coming to fruition. And they want to see how much of that they bring in-house. And there's varying degrees of that. You can use, you know, master lease companies, you can outsource it, you can use partial partners where, you know, you bring some of it in-house, like, you know, Jetstream and others, you know, you have tech partners like ourselves who can figure it out, and people find where they want to be in that kind of fully outsourced, partly in-house, fully in-house, you know, where they want to be on that curve. But the point is, almost no real estate company that I speak to in the world doesn't have some sort of strategy here. I mean, I think you have to be really behind the curve or missing something here to just be completely ignoring this.
Mm.
And ultimately, what it all comes down to is yield. Because if you embrace this and you can make a better yield, as one fund manager said to me, it's like standing in front of a wave, or you know, you can't ignore it. Other people will raise bigger funds; they'll be buying your buildings, frankly, and making more money out of it than you do. So for me, I'm very passionate. This is a kind of one-directional trip, and it's just really a question of how big this gets.
And presumably recruitment as well plays a big part in that, if you're recruiting with experience from different asset classes.
Yeah, and I think that's where the sort of people on this call, but there's other companies in our space, have done really well in terms of naturally coming with hospitality people. And there's a bit of an edge there because you're kind of embracing the hospitality component. But now we're seeing real estate companies start to bring in really senior hospitality people into the mix. So you've seen, like, for example, in Europe, there's a big student company called Unite Student. They've just replaced half their senior team with people from International Hotel Group. Like that's amazing, right? As you bring completely, really hardcore hotel people into top, chief commercial officer positions at a leading student company, and that's because they're starting to think, well, actually, students is not very far in certain areas from hospitality. And so we see a lot of this. We see Brookfield in France bringing in pure hotel staff to man their student buildings, So it's really, really interesting where backgrounds are coming from. And once you bring that in, you get support at site level, medium leadership, as well as kind of fund level. And then you can get some really interesting things happen. So yeah, recruitment is definitely something to keep an eye on in that respect.
Thank you very much, Fred. And moving on from hotels to pop-up hotels, Jason, because what you've done, I believe, from writing about you in the last couple of weeks as well, you've got this, on one hand, you've still kept the pop-up hotels, which is now called Y Hotel by Placemaker. And then you've also got these varying tiers of amenities. So perhaps you want to talk a little bit about these product types, and also maybe your reason for launching them in the first place.
Yeah, so everything Fred is saying we believe is true. Our approach in it is, he says, hey, some investors are like, what do I outsource? Do I outsource all of it? Some of it, do I do it internally? We've taken the position, the one thing I'll disagree with is Fred said, it's not complex. It is complex today, but I think that over time it becomes less complex. And our approach has been, we want to do it all. Skip wrote this, cheeky kind of article that was like, are they geniuses or are they taking on too much? And to be determined. And our view is that all of these things have this interplay. The software, the customers, the on-site operations, the tech-enabled access, it all has this tremendous interplay. And what we're trying to do is, by taking on the entire set of experiences, tech stack, data, yield optimization, all of it, what we're trying to do is figure out the best mousetrap. And we think that the most efficient way to do that is to be able to have all these interconnected things all under one umbrella. And so that's been our approach. So for pop-up, we say to a developer, just give us the 100 units. We'll do everything. We'll furnish them, we'll run them, we'll advertise them, we'll price them, we'll source all the customers, everything. We'll do everything. And pop-up is temporary, and it's really just a monetization play, right? We're monetizing vacant units in a lease up, and that's accretive to cities. We're creating jobs. We're creating an inventory that otherwise just wouldn't exist. Everyone wins. It's like a win-win-win-win. The permanent stuff, which today is over 80% of our inventory, is more complicated because it's not a additive good in that it's free money. It's substantive. You're replacing a traditional business plan, and so you really can't screw that up. We can screw up pop-up. We don't screw it up, but we could screw it up. And no one would really care because, we're making use of underutilized things. And so on the permanent approach, we run the whole asset. We are the on-site engineering team, the on-site operations, we're the tech stack, we're the yield, we're everything. We have three different, I guess in the traditional hotel world, flags we run. One is a Placemaker Experience, and that is something that's just, there's something unique about it. It's not a conventional apartment style product, or it's not of a vintage that aligns with most of our other stuff, but it has that entire tech stack and it's the same experience, but it's just the physical space might be a little different. Our next category is our signature line, which is just Placemaker. And that's our like down the middle, full apartment buildings, generally somewhere between 3 and 7 years old. So feels fresh. And And then we have our premier brand, which is like the highest end, right? It's the glass towers in a downtown. But the actual experience that customers get is the same across all three in terms of how they're supported. It's just the physical spaces, right? It's the, you're on the 30th floor of or 25th floor of a building in Nashville on the skyline. It's just a different experience than being on the 3rd floor of a stick-built building, in Midtown. And so that's really the biggest difference, is the physical spaces. And that's what we're trying to communicate to customers. But the tech stack and operating stack and everything we run is damn near the same across all three of them. And it needs to be, because the problem is already complex enough to be able to optimize.
Thank you very much, Jason. And Emmanuel, I guess we've touched on it a little bit already about the market and these changing conditions over COVID, but how do you yourself think the market is going to dictate the demand for flexible rentals moving forward?
Yeah, so there's a lot of theses, that we all have. So I said from the beginning, we're very coming from the hospitality side. So early on, we told a lot of our hospitality partners, give us long stay promos, mid stay, not long term, not year long, but multi-month promos, and let's see what happens. Is there demand? And it wasn't super successful, and there's various reasons for this. A lot of the channels are not even geared up to receive these kinds of promos and these length of stay bookings. Yesterday, I'm in that Mountain Travel Symposium in Vail right now. So last night, I took one of our large customers out for dinner, and because I was going to be on this panel today, we talked about it. And I asked, are you guys seeing, as a large hospitality partner with presence, frankly, globally in their case, are you seeing a rise in midterm or flex demand? And the answer was on their end. Now, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, because it just might be that their tech and their solution is not receptive to it. But their answer was not really. A little bit during COVID, but for the most part, in their case, they're just short-term, full throttle, so much demand. It's almost like they're already at the highest yield end of this equation with their assets. They're zoned for it. They're going full throttle. And the answer was, even if we did get demand for midterm or flex, our investors, either the asset owner or the individual owners who own the condos in these resort type buildings, they would quickly question, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we not just doing more short term?
Emmanuel, yes, can I ask you a question on that? Can I ask you a question?
Please do.
Is this apartment style product, right? So it has the kitchens and the
yes.
And what's the depth? Because I think that's what we found is, if we had 30 units, yeah, we would do all transient, because there's a ton of demand for transient at 30 units. But when we have 200 units, you start having a marginal drop off in RevPAR. And so by having a bunch of the longer stay stuff, you basically shrink the box on the short stay stuff. It's got a lower expense ratio, and your optimal yield goes up. But it only makes sense when you have 100 or 200 units. When you have onesie twosies, we find the same thing.
Yeah, these are multi-hundred or 100 type. It's not onesies or twosies or tensies. I think you're probably right, Jason. I just don't know if that expertise has trickled into the hospitality side. That knowledge or that expertise. I think they have shoulder seasons, and they're willing to drop through the shoulder season and survive, because it's short. Because that's less complex. It's easier to do that than it would be to retool themselves and learn a heck of a lot of new financial and technology skills in order to do what you're saying.
Is it and if they're condo hotels, is it by the individual or by the pool? Because that's another thing we find, right? So if you're trying to optimize for any particular one unit, you're trying to push its income, but that might mean that the aggregate income is lower. Or are these an owner owns 130 units? I mean, I could see a peak season in Vail, unless someone wants to pay 30 grand a month or 40 grand a month, you're charging nightly.
Exactly. It's individual ownership in most cases, then wrapped into an HOA or a strata.
I mean, when it's individual ownership, you are incentivized to optimize for. Was it like Nash? Wasn't that like that movie about what was it called? It was like something mind. What was it called?
It's sprung on me. If someone in the audience knows it, feel free to put it.
There's this idea in economics about winning, and if each individual owner is trying to optimize for themselves, they'll all end up with less income. On average, but if it's optimized across they'd actually all end up with more income, but you'd have to buy into the economic theory of optimization in a way that's probably hard. I'm not surprised by any of it, but if you ran it through one of our yield models, we'd be able to tell you oh, okay, this is at varying rates, and this is how you could push it up in the aggregate. That's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, it is very interesting. So yeah, I don't think the hospitality companies, at least the ones we work with, and we work with quite a few of them, I don't think they're seeing this or sense or they're not responding to this yet. I think they're still trying to figure out keyless entry solutions, frankly, in their buildings. That's where we're at with technology.
Which is a disaster, by the way. Access control is still a disaster.
Yeah. Oh, it is a disaster. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, if I could
Emmanuel.
just,
Oh, yeah, please, Brian.
I would just add a brief note on that, which I think Jason, you and I talked about this one time. Is I think that the demand is out there, but it's hard to get, and it's very lumpy. It's like we'll sell out 30 rooms to a law firm for 2 or 3 months, or we'll host a Netflix production for 6 months, and it's big and it's very lumpy. And I think that is an important that you're making, Jason. That you have to have somewhat homogeneous inventory. You have to have a lot of it. You actually have to have a really dedicated sales team to go out there and find that. But we're finding that it's there, but it takes work, and you have to have the inventory really to get it.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, is the depth of and homogeneity of the inventory and able to do those kinds of bookings. I mean, we when we opened in South Florida and Miami, to stay with us monthly probably was like 15 grand because the transient business was so strong, but we were still pricing it, right? And then like that, that can flip. Like in Northern Virginia going into COVID, our average length of stay was 3 to 5 nights. And then because of COVID, there was less transient demand. And so we were pricing all the lengths. And then our average length of stay went to 3 to 4 months because it's interim housing. And so, yeah, to Brian's point, the sales piece of that is really critical, because you don't have Netflix or Apple or whoever sign up on a one-off basis for this like beautiful, boutique-esque room, but you certainly would if they had to grab 40 of them as part of, some corporate idea.
And Jason, I mean, it must, I'm not too sure on the demographics who stay with you, but I'm presuming that the demands of these different generations of staying and living are quite different. So how would you say you're able to fulfill those needs, but also at the same time increase the property value, the NOI for your real estate partners as well?
Yeah, I think there's this perception, and I think what you're trying to politely say is older folks are less comfortable using their phone for access control or staying in something that doesn't say Marriott on the marquee. And I think the answer to that is yes, but it depends on where you draw the line. Our average age of stay is probably late 30s, maybe even 40, especially because we've run a lot in business markets. And so, yeah, if someone was used to staying at the Westin, every Monday to Thursday, and all of a sudden they could stay in a luxury apartment building in lieu of, it may not be the thing that they were used to doing, but as soon as they do it once, they get really, really comfortable. And it turns out that those are the people that spend the biggest dollars in terms of rate and volume, unless you're in a pure leisure market, and then, hand it off to the kids. So I think I would surprise you, but our demographics skew a little bit older. But people got used to Uber, right? It was like, oh, people who would want to get into an old Toyota Corolla with a stranger? Oh God. I remember I was in an office, I worked at a large REIT at the time, and there's this guy and he's like, no, I would only wait for the yellow top cab that's going to take 45 minutes. And then we get to dinner an hour before him. And then eventually you get coaxed into it, right? Like there's those early adopters, and then it like goes along the way. And I think that's what we see when your business books 60 rooms with us, then people that company have experience in it, then they talk about it. I do think that when you get a little bit older on the scale, 60s plus, I do think that is a bit of a solve where there's not as much smartphone function at, like they're just not as quick on the smartphone and turn the Bluetooth on or whatever. So I think that there is a falling off point, but it's not like 20-year-olds. It's probably like, 40 and 50-year-olds is probably you're good till then, and then it starts to get a little harder.
That's really interesting to hear, actually, Jason.
I agree.
And Brian, I mean, good that you came in, because I noticed from what you're saying with the guild as well, something that you're keen to state is that you're forging this connected community, and there's quite an emphasis on Gen Z and millennials. So how do you forge this community and use that to drive revenue for the guild?
Number one, I think it really starts with knowing who's in the community. Jason was mentioning that, understanding as much data as you can get on where they came from, why they decided to stay with you in the first place, what about the experience resonated with them. We're extremely focused on surveys and responses to really dive into the data. And then having really good BI and analytics is really important, because what that allows you to do is look at and see, okay, well, who's repeating with us? Like who's booking in multiple cities? Why are they booking? And then we go talk to them. We spend a lot of time talking to members of the community. And then we then take that and say, like, what additional value could we add? And so in the context of a full building, what type of events really resonate with this community, or what new services can we introduce? And so I think the community is hugely important, because like Jason was alluding to, someone has to have a reason to want to stay in this type of experience. There's a lot of, it's much easier just to book a Marriott or a Hilton, but if you give them a reason to do that and then they have a good experience, what you can find is that people do start to really value it and prefer it. And that's what we found. We've gotten to the point now where one of the largest segments for us is corporate travel, and it's recurring corporate travel. They go and they don't want to be in the four boxy room walls of the Marriott Monday through Thursday on a recurring assignment or for months at a time. And so for us, it's hugely important, because it drives that network effect, and it drives direct bookings. People start to come to our website directly because they heard about the Guild. You can get away from just having a purely price-sensitive guest or a consumer who's only picking you because you're slightly lower priced than what the other option is, and really get to people who are opting into, I want this experience, and I know this experience is going to be good. So for us, it's hugely important. It's part of our mission statement for a reason, and it's something that we talk about every day.
Thank you very much, Brian. And just a reminder, as we've got 10 minutes before we close the session, if you've got any questions for our panel, please do pop them in the chat, and we will make as much time as we can for them before the end to ask our panel. Fred, I'm going to come to you next as well. We're talking about these ways of scaling operations and attracting new renters. So how do you see, from your own experience, how are most companies building their tech stacks to attract new demographics, whether it's Gen Z, millennials, whether it's slightly older?
Yeah, so in our view, for too long, sadly, the real estate industry has been kind of slightly beholden to some older, very dominant companies, and particularly on the ERP, so meaning the accounting layer, and then the core property management system that works for their long-term business. And that's not a particularly controversial view. It's well out there if you speak to lots of people. There's a little bit of IBM stuff going on, meaning like you don't get fired if you roll out one of those things. But I think the error that has been made for too long is, one, those businesses are super tankers, and they are so wide. They go from all the way from like construction through to like medical to home. And just by definition, innovation kind of grinds to a halt a little bit, because they just can't be everything to every man. And then the second point is they have very closed ecosystems, partly from a defensive strategy. It's worked very well for them for a long time. But in the modern world, effectively what you're getting is they're basically being disaggregated by lots of small people who are picking off tiny bits like pricing or, well, key access, I agree, has not been solved, but other little bits of pieces of the pie, and then becoming really, really good at that. And so what we're seeing is what all the really big global real estate companies now are doing is that if you look at their new brands, the new businesses they're bringing in, what they're doing is they're starting afresh. They're picking a PMS that is basically open API, is almost number one on the list of that PMS. They're finding an ERP, so an accounting backend that kind of works anywhere. That's the ideal. And then they can mix and match third-party bits of software. And then they maybe build a couple of things that they, for whatever reason, is really, really important to them. So I know a student business that's building something that's to do with basically Asian languages and the way you interact across country, which is super relevant to them. Another one's doing something very clever around pricing, linking short, medium, and long. That's actually something I think somebody mentioned in the call was really tricky, and I agree that's really tricky. But then they're mix and matching things around a PMS that is flexible and open to all of those things. And so, I'm not really seeing many big real estate companies build their own complete stack PMS, because I think, frankly, that's not a good idea. You can spend tens or hundreds of millions and frankly get back to square one. I also thankfully think people have realized the fallacy of custom builds. So going and spending millions getting your custom. Yes, you do get the buttons exactly where you want it, but the problem is it's kind of over once by the time it's launched. You might as well rebuild it, and you're not getting that innovation. So the best kind of strategy I'm seeing out there, and what most of them seem to be adopting now, is open PMS, specialized products around it. And then also, if you open yourself to like a couple of bigger companies at the core and then lots of little new companies around the edge, you can be much more nimble. But what's really important, and if I was a real estate company, I'd be doing this, you then expose yourself to effectively the knowledge of all the rest of your peers, because they're all interacting in quite a dynamic space, and you can kind of evolve with the market rather than kind of getting stuck in time from when you signed off $5 million worth of CapEx and then 5 years later wondering why your business doesn't interact with the latest tech. So that's what we're seeing now. Of course, that is the front end, and it's easier to do on new buildings, new developments, new geos that you're moving into. There's a very different question about rolling that back onto hundreds of buildings that are using the old tech, particularly where tech matches the real world. So that's why I think keys are so painful, because you can come with something cool on the one new building you developed this year. But what do you do about the 100 buildings you've already got with different models and different blah and everything else? But yeah, flexibility for is what we're seeing as the core. Open API is super important. And then knowing when to specialize and when to go generic and versus white label as well and not is really important.
Thank you very much, Fred. And Emmanuel, I mean, Fred there's identified the issues with keys as well, key access. How are you evolving your expertise and tech? And are you still seeing that, because you're moving from short-term rentals, you're staying in short-term rentals, but you're also in mid-term and long-term rentals, and are you noticing any differences in yield between those?
Yeah, I totally agree with Fred. Open API first tech solution. We are good at what we do, Jetstream, from a tech perspective, and then we're not trying to build it all. I think this model of trying to build it all is old school. You can't be the best in the world at everything. So that's kind of the base. So we're embracing that, and that's how our tech stack is built. Multi-channel distribution has to happen in order to get the most eyeballs on your product, essentially. And now there's the rise of these kind of niche digital nomad sites, which is good, and we're definitely exploring and forming connections and partnerships with some of these smaller sites. I still think at the end of the day, Airbnb today is the king of the hill when it comes to midterm rentals. They have embraced it early on. Their tech supports it. Some of the OTAs, their tech doesn't even support bookings longer than 28 days. So yeah, I think they're the king of the hill. For us, it's been a lot of learnings on revenue management and pricing. I know I'm repeating myself here, but a friend of mine was recently looking in Hawaii for a place, because again, he works from home, 2 kids. He's like, I want to go spend 3 months in Hawaii. So he's kind of looking on the platform on Airbnb, and one home, 1 week, $10,000, and then same home, 3 months, $120,000. So there's such a lack of sophistication and knowledge out there, on average, not from the people on this call, but from the hospitality companies or the small property managers. They don't know how to revenue manage and price beyond 1 or 2 week discounts, and which gets reflected on the pricing on the talent. So there's a very, very large opportunity there, which we're building a lot of tech in-house, and of course API integrations with channels. And then merchandising is different. Some of our partners who embrace Flex, we've actually created 2 listings for them. We change the hero image and we merchandise the same unit, the same listing differently for short-term or for mid-term, and that seems to work for us. It's not pretty, but we're talking about there's a lot of unprettiness in this right now. That's a bit of the unprettiness and the messiness that we're embracing. And then finally, and this is not even tech or anything, it's just being open. Open as in being open for business. A lot of our leisure partners in pure leisure destinations, I'll take Cape Cod as an example, the small guys, they shut down outside of the peak season because they can't stay open. They don't have enough money or revenue to keep staff on. Well, by moving to a variable model, which a lot of us here are embracing in flexibility, we can keep them open even if there's no fixed cost on their end. And we are getting them 1 or 2 month bookings even through the shoulder and the slow season.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And it's encouraging to hear you talking as well about opportunities rather than challenges as well. And certainly over the next couple of months, years looking ahead, we expect there to be a lot more asset class convergence. I was probably hoping to leave sort of a little bit more time so that we could get thoughts from everyone, but I'm going to go to Brian first, and if we don't have time before the end, I might just ask you all to post 1 or 2 predictions in the chat before we finish. But Brian, seeing as you're tuning in over the phone, what are your predictions quickly about what you think we're going to see in terms of asset class convergence now?
I think it's the rise of branded living experiences, whether it's Jason and Placemaker with what they're doing, or the other panelists all contributing to this in different ways. It's that, again, like I said, it's the #1 expense for most people, and they're going to look for places they can go that get them, that understand them, that care about them, and are willing to give them a better experience. And so I think that we will see continued rise of this branded living experience for any length of time, days, weeks, months, or years, over the course of the next few years.
Jason, I think you might have some similar thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I'll be short this time. I know I'm kind of long-winded.
No,
I
not at all.
agree. I truly believe we're going to look back on this moment where buildings were used for single purposes as archaic as, like, you need to get maps to go get to a place. There's no GPS. Like, there's going to be an evolution, and it's going to be comical that you could only use a building for one thing in Cape Cod for that one time, and that was like it's just there's such an eventuality to all of it. I think the biggest question to me is, who are the winners in that? How does it play out? I think all that's to be seen, and that's kind of the fun part.
Lots to delve into in the future, I'm sure. I note Steve's question there on anyone focused on including a shared living option as well. So if any of our speakers want to message Steve in the chat whilst we go through these last few slides, then please do go ahead. So big thank you to all of our contributors, to Emmanuel, to Brian, to Jason, to Fred. It's been a truly enlightening conversation today. I only wish we had another hour, to be quite honest. So I've just got a couple of slides to run through first before we finish. So as you can see there on screen, we're currently building up to our annual Shorties Awards for the global short-term rental industry, which are back and being held at Skyline London this year on Wednesday, the 18th of May. We hope to see many of you there, of course, back at an in-person event, and more details on how to get tickets and on the event itself are in the chat now. We're back on Tuesday, the 19th of April for our next short-term rentals webinar on Tuesday, the 19th of April, and it's called Simplify with Zimplify, Automating Vacation Rental Accounting, sponsored by Zimplify. You can sign up for the session in the chat, or you can also, I believe, scan the QR code on your screen now. For sponsorship opportunities, please do contact my colleague Katie, whose details are again on your screen now. Big thank you again to Flywire and NoiseAware for sponsoring our Rockstars series and session. We're going to keep the session open just for another 2 minutes, so our speakers are welcome to hang around there and answer any questions or jot anything in the chat. Anyone listening in can do the same. And feel free to contact us via our various channels. You can see them there. So all that's left for me to say is thank you again for listening. To all of our speakers, a big thank you, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you very much.